So we have two words here, well-being and wellness. And I intentionally use the word well-being because wellness doesn't quite encompass everything we mean. If you look up the definition of wellness, thanks to Google, it is the state of being in good health, especially as an actively pursued goal. So it's the opposite of wellness is sickness. When you talk about it as a goal, once you've achieved the goal, then are you all good? Are you now well? The idea, the mentality behind it is this thing of a fixing mentality. We are broken and we need fixing. Once we are fixed, we are well, and now we can move away from that because now we're done. Tick the box, which is why the image is there. Whereas well-being is a state of being. The definition is a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. And I understand this as a lifelong journey. It's not a goal that we've achieved and then we're done. And so well-being comes with this maintenance mentality rather than a fixing mentality. Life has its ups and its downs. It's not all roses. And how do we live our best life despite the roller coaster? Hence the image. Right? Life is like a roller coaster, and we need to build the resilience to be able to actually roll with it and have fun doing it. I know some people are not so much fans of roller coasters. Most wellness policies that we see and take off the shelf or ask ChatGPT for will talk about the concept of a work-life balance. And this is just hilarious because it's not as if life only happens outside of work. There's work and then there's the real life. The focus is always on an employee happiness, and it's for productivity without taking into account that the human brings all their personal life into the workspace, right? We're not robots who can switch off the concerns over an ailing mother or the angry remnants of a fight with your spouse as soon as we cross the threshold into the office. Right? What happens if the office is at home, like mine? So this work-life balance really doesn't speak to what we are trying to achieve. Okay, we are holistic beings with relationships, interests, talents. My well-being impacts all aspects of my life. I tried to find an image for a holistic being, and then you start going, do we want male, female, age, race? Like, just put me. This is me. This is all of me, right? Because I am a holistic being, and my well-being is influenced by all aspects of my life. Right, so we can kind of group them to somewhat and say there's a home life well-being and there's a work-life well-being, assuming you can put your life into sort of the two categories. And we are concerned about the health and happiness of people in both of those spheres, right? Their impact on each other, both positively and negatively. So something might be a very small issue in your personal life, but when you have issues in all aspects of your life, they stack. And so it really sucks. For example, your boss constantly puts you down and you just want to quit every day. But when you go home to a spouse who is also worried about money, there's no safe space for you to be happy. You're taking the challenges of the one into the other areas. So it's easy to wallow in despair and wish the boss would change or your spouse would worry less. But unfortunately, this is when you're not on the right thing, I am responsible for me. I am the only one who is responsible for my well-being. I'm the only one who can change my mindset, my beliefs about reality or the situation. I need to reframe things. I need to make decisions around my life and take actions for myself. I'm responsible for developing healthy habits. So I'm responsible for my own happiness. What that doesn't mean is that I must be artificially happy in all situations, right? Just put on a brave face. Isn't that what we say? Just be, put a smile on it. This artificial fake smile, right? That's not what it means. And it also doesn't mean that I have control over all situations in my life. We are going to have challenges. We're going to have struggles. We're going to have trauma. There's going to be things that negatively impact us that we have no control over. But it is rather that I realize that the power I have in every situation. So we have control over ourselves and we have power within that. And we can engage in every situation out of that power. So let me show you what I mean. All right. So this is our newly developed heart rate monitor model. Okay. If you've ever heard me speak before, you would have heard me talk about our hamburger model and our donut model. And if you're interested in those, I'm sure we have some recordings on our YouTube channel of me speaking about them. But this is our newly developed heart rate model. And I must confess that this was inspired by Benjamin Janssen van Rensburg, who is a Positive Vibes project manager. And he did a presentation at the ILGA conference recently on trauma-informed facilitation. And he presented a nervous system diagram. And I've kind of stolen a little bit of an inspiration from that. So this is the baseline, right? And as nonprofits, I know Kaylee's in M&E here, we love our baselines, right? We need to know what our starting point is, okay? This guy's happiness level isn't very high if you're looking at the what's that, the vertical side, the happiness, right? But it's also not very realistic because no one is exactly the same amount of happy every single day. If this really was a heart rate monitor, this guy would be dead. Well, at least on the inside. So it is more like this, where life has its ups, it has its downs, it fluctuates. We kind of have sort of a top limit, sort of a bottom limit. We kind of live within a range, right? It is not so cut and dry. And then we have negative stresses that consistently impact on our lives. Some of them are short-lived. For example, I had a car accident last Thursday. That was a moment of trauma, but I'm okay. My car only has slight damage. It was rough for a few days, but my well-being has recovered, right? But some short-lived stresses can have a long-lasting effect on us. Other stresses may be pervasive and perpetual. Maybe you don't live in a safe environment, and that plays an underlying role on your daily levels of stress. It's very personal how a negative stressor will impact on you, right? If your well-being is pretty low, something small can just push you right out the bottom. Maybe stresses are coming hard and fast and you don't have time to come up for air. Things are just like boom, 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 boom. Maybe there was a small incident early on in life that has left a lasting impact. So the same small stressor has a huge trigger in your life and becomes a big impact in your well-being. We don't know. It's personal to each one of us. So when we engage with each other, we have to do it with kindness. We really do. To us, they may be overreacting. It's not a big deal. They're really just like with a little thing. but we don't know where they're at, and we don't know what else is going on in their lives. This is a thing that I often have to remind myself of when I get cut off in traffic by a taxi driver. Because, you know, sometimes people pull fingers out at you and make gestures, and, you know, they get angry with you and you go, oh, shame. A lot must be going on in their lives that I don't know about. Because we don't. It could be, we have to treat people with kindness. So let me tell you a little bit about my story and this year for me. So it actually started last year. It was a very stressful year for a whole range of reasons. And the Christmas holiday wasn't enough for me to get back up to my baseline. So I came into the year already running low. Later on in talking it through, I realized that we as a family have struggled with various events, I suppose, of depression over the last 10 years. We've dealt with a global pandemic, and so much in our work, certainly my work world, has changed. I've been living in crisis mode for 10 years. So at the start of the year, I took on a client project that grew significantly in scope while dealing with some personal stuff. And I know from talking to a number of people that as high achievers, we can cope with a tremendous amount of work stress. But when you add a layer of emotional stress, I'm done. That just like is always the cherry on the top. So I don't know why this time round I couldn't cope as well. I don't know what it was that was like, maybe I was listening to my body more. Maybe I didn't push through as I've done so often before. But I found that I was staring into space. I was forgetting things. I was tired all the time. And all the time I'm just going, come on, just focus. I'm totally distracted. Come on, you've got to get, and this whole like push through the fog, push through the thing. And when I started getting out of breath, just walking down the stairs, not up the stairs, just down the stairs. And when my heart started pounding at random times for no reason, almost like a panic attack, I realized this is something more. And so I went to a doctor because, you know, heart attacks are the silent killer in women. And I was diagnosed with burnout. I'm thinking, heart burnout? Okay. But clearly it had gone past my brain and into my body, and I was feeling it in my body. Guess what the cardiologist said? The solution? Exercise! Yay! No. Yes, exercise and sleep. So he put me on some meds, and I started taking naps, sometimes more than one, during the day, and I went to see a therapist. I felt a whole lot better almost straight away. Before the meds kicked in, or, you know, you were supposed to feel a response from the meds. But yet nothing had practically changed in my world yet, other than sleeping a little bit more. I still had the workload, I still had the deliverables, but what had changed was my mindset. So much of the stress that I carry around, and I think a lot of us do, is due to our belief about things. Because we don't live in a war zone. I don't live in an unsafe area. My practical stresses in my environment are fairly low. But what I do in my head really impacts how I feel stress in my body. And so now my challenge has been to develop healthy practices and keep reminding my brain that I've changed my mindset so that I don't go back there, right? So that's just a little bit of my story and how I found our brains play tricks on us so much. So in order to reduce the toll of negative stresses on our well-being, we have to develop healthy tools and healthy practices. And the first step is always awareness, awareness, awareness. Even if you get none of the rest right, awareness. Once you become aware of your mindset, once you become aware of the stresses in your life, once you become aware of their impact on you and your system, you can already start to change things, and you can take stock of where you're at. And this is almost an ongoing, lifelong practice. When you have a car accident out of the blue, stopping and saying, okay, how has this impacted me? Why am I feeling like this? What is it that I'm feeling? How is it? That emotional awareness is the starting step. And then where possible, reduce the stresses. So, say no to those extra tasks, delegate, move things off. So at the time I went into burnout, I was leading on and involved in way too many things. And I had to do a process of editing. So that was for me reducing the stresses. But then there's also self-regulating. Being in touch with yourself. What is it that actually helps to calm you? Hugs for me, big one, hugs. So now I go and say to my husband, I need a hug, because I'm conscious of what it is that actually helps me to regulate my nervous system and regulate my happiness and my mood and all of those things. And then when you have the headspace for it, education is so key. Learn as much as you can about yourself, about others, about our physiology and how those negative stresses impact us on an ongoing basis. What does trauma do to you? How does it work in your system, right? And then lastly, but not least, is accountability. Having a relationship with somebody, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a friend, whether it be a parent, a spouse, where they hold you accountable for when you fly off the handle and are totally triggered by something, and they say to you, what happened there? Why was that the straw that broke the camel's back? Why did you explode on that moment? And help you to unpack and engage with your own well-being and hold you accountable to pursuing better well-being. Okay. So that then changes our graph a little bit. Okay. So the dotted line there is the original image that we had. The ups and downs of the roller coaster, where the work stress and the personal problems and all of the overwhelm and everything is creating a dip in our happiness. But now we have these positive practices that are a counter to that. They're pushing up and creating more balance. So the dark wiggle, you can see that in some of the cases, the dip is not so low, right? And in other cases, the dip is the up is even higher. Or there's an up where there wasn't a down, there was a down. So we're balancing things out here, okay? For me, the most important one on this little list of positive practices is fun, okay? Is fun, to have fun. So this is on my whiteboard, right up here now, because this is my personal practice, one of my personal positive practices. Okay. When I feel that the world is overwhelming, when I get stressed because I have so much on my plate and I can't deal, and this is the easy triggers for me, right? I go there quite quickly, and I go there, it's a downward spiral, and then I end up being like, I can't, and I stress. So when the world is not okay for me, I look up at the board and I go, right, I got to delegate it. I got to slow the world down, one thing at a time, focus on the fun, get up, get out, get into nature, exercise, and let it be what it will be. So this is my whiteboard. This is not your whiteboard. So don't write these things down and go, okay, I must write this on my whiteboard. What is it that you're going to write? What is it that you're going to stick up on your mirror in front of you? What is it that you are going to internalize to say, this is how I deal when I am feeling that my wiggly line is starting to slip down towards the bottom level? And for me, a lot of it is in my head. And so getting it out of my head is so helpful. Okay, so I learned this a long time ago, and I have to keep reminding myself that we need to feed our soul. And what that means is not just escape from the negative feelings. So often when we are feeling overwhelmed, we'll go into a book, we'll go into the TikTok or Facebook or whatever and doom scroll. It's an escape. We're trying to not be where we are. And there's so many options for us to escape. And that's positive, but it can't be the only way that we move that bar. The other thing is we have to feed into ourselves and to actually do stuff that makes you happy. So instead of just letting go of the negative, but to actively fill up your bucket with positives, whether that be walks in nature or being creative or whatever it is that makes you happy. Feed the so it's letting go of the negatives and feeding the positives. Okay, it's quite important that we don't just doom scroll to escape, right? So the last question on this is who do I influence? Whose well-being do I have an impact on, right? There's obvious ones when I'm in a bad mood and I'm not in a good space. My son is impacted, right? Family, right? Because, you know, he comes in to ask me if I can play soccer and I snap at him, and that's a negative impact, right? But when I'm in control of my own happiness and I'm being proactive about my own personal practices, I can positively influence. So recently, I obviously been sharing this journey with my mom and having conversations about where I'm at and going to therapy and stuff like that. And recently my mom said to me she'd actually spoken to a friend of hers who's a trained counselor and said to her friend, can I talk to you as a therapist? And she unpacked stuff that was going on in her life. And so I like to think that through this journey, I have positively impacted family, particularly, in how to take steps to really deal with the things that are negatively impacting their well-being. We have some colleagues on the line, on the call here. We've also had these conversations around where I'm at, where they're at, and we can influence others. So when we talk about our well-being, it's not from a self-centered point of view. We actually do have a wider realm of influence, and by getting it right for ourselves, we can also get it, help others to get it right. Okay, so then we start talking about our organizations. What is the role of the organization in our well-being journey? How can we as an organization support our employees, our team? So the first one is always do no harm. So let's make sure that the environment is not toxic. We don't have bad management practices. We're not a critical or judgmental or unhealthy organizational culture, right? So let's start there. Let's identify where I don't want to say bad apples as in individuals, but bad apples as in cultural practices are sitting that are spoiling the bunch. Let's make sure that we're actually not perpetuating the unhealthy. So ideally, you don't want to add to the negative stresses, but also the organization is an opportunity to create a supportive culture and environment and to be supportive of each person's own efforts to improve their well-being. So there's the twofold. There's being supportive of the individual, but also creating an environment that is geared towards well-being. So when we look at our model, you'll see that we have this sort of gray arrows, which is the organizational support, which is pushing along with the positive practices. That whole graph has shifted up. So the dotted lines are the thresholds and the roller coaster that we had previously, because we started with a fairly low baseline. But when you have organizational support, you can shift the whole thing and then operate from a much higher level of general happiness. And our squiggles is a lot flatter, because the ups are not so up and the downs are not so down, and we're living closer to our top limit. And only the really severe things will drop us down to the bottom and knock us for a moment, because we have the organizational support and our own positive practices to bring us back up. So when Positive Vibes and I were looking at well-being, one of the things that we always do, aside from setting a baseline, is to see what else is out there. Let's start with the standard practice and bring that in and personalize it. And so an organizational development specialist called Warren Banks did some research on wellness and well-being policies within the world, but also focused on the nonprofit space. And he struggled. He really struggled to find anything, particularly in the nonprofit space. Most of what he found was corporate, because corporate throws money at these things, right? You have self-care and pampering and team building events and childcare and, let's go out for drinks and that makes everybody feel better, supposedly, right? They throw money at these things and create this old mutual complex where you can get everything, your whole life sorted out as under their wellness practice. But we're nonprofits. We don't have that kind of money. Nobody ever has that kind of money for this. Donors don't tend to fund a well-being line item. So what is at the core of what we actually are trying to achieve here? And this is kind of how I've structured it into a bit of a model. And you'll see, let's start at the bottom. The foundation of it is the infrastructure that the organization puts in place. Okay? These are basic level, foundational ways of being, right? You've got your basic conditions. When you pay people properly, it takes a huge pressure of their financial health and their mental health, right? So let's start there. What are your basic conditions? How are you remunerating people? What does that package look like? Then there's organizational culture. Is it a culture of support to mental health challenges and, stress and understanding these things? And is it a human-centered culture, or is it a profit-driven culture? Right? And I say that loosely because we're non-profits, but we're making a profit. Is it about the money? Is it about the deliverables? Is it about the donor deadlines? Right? Then we look at the policies. Do you have good HR policies that guide you in terms of leave and how you treat people, right? And then there's the practical physical environment. So people know me, they know I'm about plants. And the number of times that I have gone into an office, we're setting up an office somewhere and I'm like, we need plants. I've even gone to Builder's Warehouse and bought plastic little plant things to have green. We need green in the work environment, right? Little things like that create an environment that is conducive, that is calming, that is, don't paint your walls red, just note, right? How is the physical environment that people work in conducive to well-being? Are you in a risky area? How do you support your staff when they're coming to and from work if that is something that would add a stress level to them? So that gives you your infrastructure. Then we talk about the operations. The operations is how we actually work. So your infrastructure talks about how we treat people on principle. So these are our rules for engagement. Then the operations is what do we practically do? How does this work out for us? Okay. Another word for guidelines that I think is quite helpful is something called guardrails. So how do we protect the human being at the center of the work that we do? So for example, Positive Vibes is now putting together travel guidelines. And the challenge has been that because of donor commitments and activity schedules and everything like that, the travel that the team have to undertake has been significant. And that creates a pressure on people's own personal practices. When your work schedule, your travel schedule is creating this negative weight on you, only so much of deep breathing and massage is going to help balance it out, right? And so these travel guardrails are things like you can't travel back to back. You need a certain amount of gap between trips. You can only travel for so long. Structure like that it's not policy, but it is a guideline for how we actually outwork the work in order for us to recognize that the human experience is just, if not more of a priority than meeting the donor obligations. We have to balance that. So often we focus on achieving the deliverables at the expense of the human experience. That's our lowest priority. So that's where guidelines can come in and actually create a framework for you to work within. Processes is a fun one. This is where I like working in. How do we streamline processes? How do we make work easier? You know, is some of these things that we do within our work are cumbersome and complex and you can hear my body language and my voice here going, oh gosh, I've got to fill in a timesheet, okay? And everything in you is going, oh, I have to do this every day. And it's a stressor that is eking, and it's a thing I don't want to do, and it's an unfun task, and I'm having to use my willpower to make me do it. But let's use a technology. You look at what are the things that we can do in our everyday to actually make life easier for ourselves. That includes doing things like reducing overwhelm, setting realistic goals. Right? Let's be realistic about this. Let's take the person into account. Then lastly on this operations one is management. And if you ask why, well, the studies will show how often people leave their jobs because of bad management or poor management or toxic management above everything else. The manager has such a pivotal role to play in the well-being of their team. And so we need to look at what our management style. Can we create a management style that is supportive of well-being rather than reducing it? When we look at human-centered management that is sensitive to people's internal space and where they're at and what's going on in their wider life and all of those things, you create a well-functioning team because you are engaging with the real person and accommodating them in a way that means that they will actually be productive instead of enforcing timesheets that everybody is, struggling through. But it's very important that You don't swing the pendulum to the other side. We're not pushovers. Just because somebody is struggling with their mental health and they're struggling to function doesn't mean that there isn't an obligation on them to actually do their job and to find ways to develop their own personal practices. The organization can't replace your own personal positive practices to support your own mental health. This is another Bennerism. Benjamin's calls it courageous conversations. And I really like that, is when you're in a difficult space, when somebody's not performing, when there's something that is stuck between you, it takes courage to have a difficult conversation with someone. It takes courage to actually engage with that. And so saying to somebody, look, I need to have a courageous conversation with you, reflects that both you need bravery, but they also need to understand where you're coming from, that this is not easy and this is difficult. And that they need to have bravery to hear it and to internalize it and respond appropriately, rather than responding out of a triggered emotional space. Then you can sit down and say, right, this is not working, and catching stuff early and having a courageous conversation when it's a little thing means that it doesn't become a big thing and we can actually deal with the individual. And 90% of the time you'll find that the reason for your courageous conversation is that the person is dealing with something outside of the sphere of that work environment. And then when you've identified that, you've had an honest conversation, then you can do the other side and support their personal practices in order to help them to get to a place where they can deliver for you. So there's a lot that can be unpacked there in terms of management and management training and human-centered management. But it is such a critical part of an organization's well-being practices. Right, then the last little one is the education. Simple. Let's provide our staff and our team with resources. Let's have articles on mental health, nervous system. What about a list of contacts? Where can I get counseling? Where can I go for resources? Who can I speak to? How do I deal with that? And maybe it's not focused on mental health. Maybe it's financial health. Is there a contact for debt review and debt counseling? Right? Let's put that on the resource list that people can then engage with. So building up that sort of list of people that are available to your staff means that they know where they can go for the support that they need. Right? Maybe it's as simple as an Excel course so that the work is easier. Right? We're holistic humans. So typically our staff development budget has been around position-related training, technical skills, right? You're a project manager, you're going to go on a project management course. You're going to finance person, you're going to do an accounting course. But maybe what we actually need is something that is broader, that engages with the well-being of the entire individual, right? So that's where you look at the resources as well as the training that you as an organization can provide and make available to your team. And then the most important part of it is this whole practice is couched within community. And it's the time of year now where we are having our Christmas parties, we're doing fun activities together, and we're really leveraging that sense of community. And we're hoping that that one Christmas party is going to connect us and bond us for the entire year, despite all the stresses and everything else that throws off our roller coaster. And then we'll be okay until next Christmas in our relationships, right? It doesn't work like that. So recognizing the role community plays, recognizing that we spend significant amount of our working lives, or our lives at work, and our work relationships are sometimes closer than any of the other relationships we have. Building supportive relationships within our organization is important. It's also, if you have money for it, or even if you don't, come up with creative ways of doing fun activities together. Let's go for walks. Let's do things. Let's build the relationships, because we're a community of relationships that have chosen to do work together and to create an outcome together. The other advantage of community is it allows for accountability, right? It's so much easier to have a courageous conversation with let's say, a reporting staff member, when that reporting staff member's peers have already been saying to them, hang on, I've noticed this thing, you're doing this. I've noticed you're not doing that. And holding them accountable to their own personal agreements. They've agreed to practice these positive practices, and it's slipping for whatever reason. Having accountability within the team means that we are able to support the individual as much as supporting the structure within which we work as an entity, as an organization. Okay, so this is the other model that we've put together that really gives you a snapshot of what you should be looking at as an organization. When you're starting to consider your staff's well-being and how you want to improve that over time, these are the areas you should be tapping into. Where do we stand on this? What is the kind of organizational culture? How do we want to shift these things? All right. So well-being is a lifelong goal. There's this concept called a thriving me. Define what a thriving me looks like for each one of you. Take a moment and consider, what does it look like if I was thriving? And for me, about 18 months ago, this idea of feeling fully alive, not just a hamster wheel of rinse and repeat day in and day out. It's really about, how do I feel alive? What does it mean? What do I have to do to feel alive? And so on my whiteboard, on the one side, you've got when the world is not okay, and the one directly above my head is feel fully alive. And it's a constant reminder that that's my goal. My goal for life is to feel fully alive. And to do that, we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate what we've done, celebrate where we've come from, celebrate the progress we've made, celebrate how our line has shifted a little bit over this past year. And so I would really encourage you now, for this, going into these holidays, that you sit and you take a moment and you say, well, what does a thriving me look like? Where was I? Where have I come? What are the things I want to put in place in the next year to be able to shift my baseline, so that even though I can't make a straight line, it's always going to be some ups and downs, that my general well-being can shift over time further and further up, so that I'm starting from a higher point. And then once you've taken that internal moment to really work with yourself, because we always start with self and then we work out, then have a look next year when you start the year. Where are we as an organization? What are our challenges? What are the problems? Where are the things that aren't working? How do we unlock that with a human-centered approach to actually develop and build well-being? Because happy people are productive people, right? So if you want to take it to the bottom line side of things, it makes sense. But actually, we care about people for people's sake. And for us to find our organization as one that is supportive of people in the workplace and supportive of people outside of the workplace means you'll be a sought after employer, you'll be a productive organization, and you'll just make the world a better place. So start with you over these holidays, and then next year we start in on the organization and shifting that baseline. Okay, it's a plan. Thank you very much for listening.